Thank you very much, everyone, for waiting while we got this up and running. We're a minute late, and we apologise for that. But it is a really special chance for us to launch the Riverfest, the Great Stour Riverfest tonight. And I'm Councillor Charlotte Cornell. I'm the council member. My brief includes open spaces, and that includes rivers. And I've met a good few of you on this call tonight, but by no means everyone. And hopefully we can make some connections. We can all learn a lot. We can learn what needs celebrating, what needs protecting, and the why and wherefore. It's a really special and exciting space. And thanks in advance to Ben and Lauren and Jake, who are all going to present on different areas of the ecology or history or wildlife or balance in the Stour, each, I'm sure, learning as much from the other as we will from them. But most a special thanks to Rob from the Open Spaces team at Canterbury City Council, who has set up tonight. And it's a really innovative and exciting chance for us. It's something that I wish we did more of, getting the community together online like this to celebrate certain elements of our culture, history, or space. So thank you, Rob. You've done a really excellent job in pulling this together. The River Stour has been referred to as the Stour since at least 686, maybe even before then. And is it Stour or is it Stour? People up and down the river will debate with you, and the pronunciation of the river's name is a matter of where you live and how long you've lived there. Perhaps 200, 300 years ago, it would have been certainly Stour, which is a Saxon era word for fast or swift or quickly moving. And there are other Stours or Stours found in Germanic parts of Europe. So this is our little patch of Saxon Germania River. Before it was called the Stour, the Romans, I'm sure, had a different name. And Jake from the Canterbury Archaeological Trust, who is the expert on all things Roman in this city, will enlighten us, I suppose, as some of the sort of pre-Saxon importance of the river as well. The Great Stour rises in Lenham. And again, I know from the work that Kat and other archaeological groups have done how important the area around Lenham is to Roman and indeed pre-Roman settlement. And part of that might be the fact that the river rises there, and it rises from the grassland aquifers and is crystal clear in those parts. It's some of the freshest water you could find in Kent just by the very natural filtration of the waters. So it's no surprise that ancient settlements are found and continue to be found in that particular part of Kent. The Stour, in Henry VIII's time, there was a great petition to widen and dredge and clean it in the hope that we could get ships all the way up to Canterbury. At that point, it was only navigable to Fordwich, as now, really, and to improve the economy of Canterbury, they really wanted to bring the ships all the way into the city. And this project to widen and dredge the Stour so that ships could come in was on and off for nearly 100 years until ultimately it proved unaffordable for the city corporation and was scrapped. But the river itself is such the beating heart of the town's economy and vibrancy, and the reason it exists at all, and the wildlife that has fed the town, the waters that have powered the mills. It is because of the river that we and this city and the wider area of the Great Stour are here at all. The banks of the Stour used to be used for hemp growing and rope making, and there's evidence in the corporation archives of women sitting by the banks of the Stour pulling hemp and making rope, and that just one of the many industries that the river gave birth to. So, of course, the river's looked after us, and I mean us, the area, the Greater Stour catchment, for generations and generations and generations, and it is our duty very much to look after her. Species returning to the river have included eels and bream and brook lamprey, and of course the return of fish supports the wider return of larger species such as kingfishers and herons. The more fish return, the more the wider ecosystem will. But the fish don't come without clean flowing waters. And we all know from the national issue around nutrient neutrality how much of a generational and political issue this is. It's going to go on and on and on until we fix our water companies and we fix our systems, and we all realize that every single person, not just highest level politicians, have a part to play. Our water is polluted from, yes, pesticides and yes, chemical runoffs from farms, and 82% of the catchment area of the Great Stour is farmland. But it also comes from what the chemicals we use in our own houses, from our washing up liquid, from what we wash our clothes in, from our bleaches and face powders and makeup and cleaning cloths and runoff. All of it contributes to the biodiversity and the cleanliness of the water. Here we are, it looks lovely and fresh, but as we know from some of our water testing, you know, our rivers are still need our desperate help. They need political and seismic political change. And that political change requires a public will. That's why, you know, voting is so important. Of course, I'm gonna here as a politician and open spaces and river champion, so trying to cover, and historian, so trying to cover all those things in my opening speech. And that's it, really. The nutrient we have to protect Stour Marsh as our SSI. Look here at the yellow algae seen growing only a few weeks ago. We have to protect the microbiology of the river, the small animals that breed off it, the tiny plants. We have to roll back from some of the invasive species taking over, such as the American signal crayfish or the mink. We have to protect our native species and the native biodiversity that has in turn nurtured the very fact that we're all here at all. So I don't know if that was cheery or not. I think it was supposed to be. In short, what an amazing river. Let's learn more about her, and welcome to the Great Stour Riverfest. So I'm going to pass back to Rob, who's going to say what the next sort of hour and a half will bring. And thank you all very much for your time and for coming tonight.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. That's a lovely welcome, and has really put it into perspective, you know, the sort of need to protect the Great Stour, which I'm sure we're all here for and we're all passionate about. So first of all, why Great Stour Riverfest? I think that's quite important to understand. So basically, the Great Stour Riverfest came about from a community workshop, which was on the Riverside strategy. So local stakeholders and interest groups coming together to really provide their local knowledge into, you know, improve and create this Riverside strategy. And as part of that, the Riverfest became an action, and we're now obviously delivering on that action as probably one of the first ones, and what a great way to kick off with this itself. The vision for the river can be found in this Riverside strategy, and it's now available on the council's website. So I'll put a link into the chat where you can access and have a look at the Riverside strategy. But also there'll be a few links there as well that will kind of be relevant throughout the rest of this presentation. So yeah, the local community and interest groups, like I said, have been involved from the very start, and they've helped pull together a wonderful program of events, which hopefully some of you have signed up to already. We might see you there in the next coming days, or you might have already been on one. Some have happened or started on Monday. So the community's aim for this Riverfest is, you know, obviously there's many aims from it, but to summarize, we could say that the aim is for the festival to build awareness of the Great Stour and celebrate its recreational and ecological value in order to protect the river for future generations. So what's happened so far in terms of the Riverfest? Well, last month, the Canterbury Society ran a photography competition called The Great Stour and Its Wildlife. And this Monday, the judging took place for all the entries, and I've seen the entries, and there are some wonderful pictures there. So you may be able to see them go up on social media once the winner has been announced. Canterbury BID have also been involved with some bulb planting along Westgate Gardens Riverside. It's an area of the gardens that tends to perhaps be a bit sort of neglected. It's a bit more, well, not neglected, it's a bit more of a wilder side to the river, or side to Westgate Gardens. So we thought we'd introduce the sort of better flora diversity there. A lot of the bulbs are pollinator friendly. And if you want to continue with that, we also have another event coming up down at Westgate Gardens to finish off the great work that Canterbury Bid started on. We also had a river clean yesterday, organised by the Friends of Kingsmead Field. As you can see, the two pictures on the bottom right show the sort of community pulling together as they always do. And then on the far right, the amount of rubbish that they managed to find. I think it was within an hour or two. So really impressive stuff there. And again, there's many more opportunities to get involved with actions like this throughout the week. There's another river clean coming up, and there's also a variety of litter picks along the riverside. And then as we speak, a really exciting one, Shirley Thompson is leading a back walk around the Franciscan Gardens, which is the first time she's ever been around the Franciscan Gardens. So hopefully they're in for for plenty to see there. And Shirley is part of the Kent Back group. So if you want to get involved in any way, then you can find their information online and contact Shirley. But yeah, she does events like this throughout the year. So again, you can get involved outside of the Riverfest as well. So now coming up, what events do we have coming up? So we have a Riverside Open Space Walk tomorrow, which is led by myself, Rebecca, and Dan from my team at the council. There is still no, that is sold out, that one, unfortunately. But we also have the bulb planting. There's still tickets available for that. That is also tomorrow. We have river dipping run by Lauren Baker, who's one of our speakers later. So it's aimed at children. There are some tickets available still. Some have sold out, so you have to check on the Eventbrite for the specifics of which ones are still available. And then you'll be able to put all of your sort of knowledge from today into practice whilst river dipping. And then Anna Outdoors as well is doing arts and crafts events, but they've both sold out. And then there's an Interfaith Riverside Walk as well on Saturday with the Canterbury and District Interfaith Action, which, if you're interested, you can sign up to that as well. And then we have a late addition to the calendar, but a very much welcome one from the Abbots Mill project. There's tickets still available for that, as it's a late entry. But really interesting stuff they do over at Abbots Mill. If you want to have a look on their website, there's a lot of stuff about social justice and climate justice. So I'm sure their talk will be as interesting as, or more interesting than what they have online. And then, there's another river clean you can sign up to. And then John Shelton from KSCP is running a guided walk. That has sold out as well, unfortunately, so you can't sign up to that anymore. And then another river dipping session with Lauren, and a river clean run by the Canterbury Society. So all of this can be found online if you want to book onto anything, if you haven't done so already. And now let me introduce you to our guest speakers for today. So first up, we have Ben Morris from the Environment Agency, and he'll be talking about the wild beavers in the Stour catchment. And then following that, we have Lauren Baker from the Kentish Stour Countryside Partnership, and she's an R Stour officer, and she'll be doing a talk on sort of the wider ecology of the river, titled, well, it's a special river, as we know. And then Jake Weeks from the Canterbury Archaeological Trust will be doing a talk on the brief history of Canterbury, its springs, and the Great Stour. So there's plenty to get your teeth sunk into. And we will be doing a Q&A session at the end. So rather than between each talk, we'll be doing all of it at the end. But instead of directing your questions into the chat, could you please use, we're using Slido just because it's a bit simpler. We're less likely to miss your questions. You can get onto the website by either scanning the QR code. There also is a link in the chat which Dan has kindly put in for you, so you can go straight to that as well. And we'll answer them all at the end in the 15 minutes at the end. So without further ado, I'll introduce you to Ben, who's going to talk about wild beavers in the Stour catchment.
Evening, everyone. As Rob just said, my name is Ben Morris. I work for the Environment Agency. I'm the beaver technical specialist. There's 4 of us dotted about the country. My area is Kent, London, and East Anglia. Luckily for me, at the moment, all the beavers are currently in Kent. I'm sure that'll change as time goes on. Next slide, please, Rob. So this will be a bit of a whirlwind sort of run through about beavers and just some up-to-date stuff about what's been going on with the beavers in the Stour catchment. So very quickly, beavers were once a native species to Britain, as the rest of Europe. The Eurasian beaver is the one we should have here. There is another species of beaver, the North American beaver, or which covers its natural range is North America and Canada. They look very similar, but they are two separate species. They don't interbreed. Beavers were hunted to near extinction for their fur, mainly for their fur, also for their meat and their castoreum, which is a secretion that comes out of their rear ends, essentially. Used for food flavorings and other such things like that. Apparently, it tastes like vanilla. I've not tried it yet myself. They were thought to be extinct in the UK somewhere around the 16th century. It sort of varies a bit, but somewhere around that sort of time. You do the next slide, please. So very quickly, again, just about the beavers in general. As I mentioned, we've got the Eurasian beaver here in England, hopefully. They're second largest beavers altogether, both species. The second largest rodent species, it's the capybara, is the largest one in South America. Beavers can weigh up to about 30 kilograms. Generally, an adult beaver will be over 20 kilograms. They're nocturnal or crepuscular, so they'll be out roughly the same sort of time in the evening. So in the summer, you'll see them in the daylight hours, but in the winter, they'll be out fully in the night time in the dark. They're fully territorial. They're one of the things that some people are concerned about because they are rodents is that we'll essentially be overrun with them. But they're very fiercely territorial, in fact. So once they've got their territory established, it might sort of vary in size over time. But generally, once they get to a certain number, they sort of manage their own numbers. So we won't end up inundated with them as you might with other rodent species. They're completely herbivorous. They don't eat fish. They only eat vegetation. They're well known for eating trees, but they eat a whole range of other things. So up to 450 plant species have been recorded in their diet. They eat pretty much everything. We haven't found anything they haven't eaten just yet. And they're well known as keystone species and ecosystem engineers, because their lodge building activities, their burrowing, the way they create these wonderful habitats for other species. And they're also very much a flagship species at the moment. Next slide, please. So, for some of you may be aware, as of October last year, beavers are now considered a native and protected species, a native species again, in England, and they're with that status, they've been given protected species status under the HABS regs, so they're considered a European protected species, similar to otters. So they have a similar level of protection. So the beavers are protected, and their structures and their sort of living spaces are also protected features. It's also an offence under. It would also be an offence under the Wildlife and Countryside Act to release beavers, even though they're considered native now, without a licence. Next slide, please. Sorry. So why beavers? If you click, lovely, thank you. As I mentioned, they're a keystone species and an ecosystem engineer, which this comes in a lot of ways. So one of the things that they're very well known for is their activities on trees. You can see in these two pictures. So generally, what they'll do is these are quite small trees. But what they'll do is they can fell trees because they want the bark. They feed on the bark and the soft material under the bark, which I can never remember what it's called, but it's got its own name. And more often than not, the trees that they fell are coppice, so they don't die, especially things like willows, which you can see in the picture on the left there. There's the tree, the main trunk of the tree has been felled, and then there's some nice fresh growth from spring. Sometimes we're not really sure why. It could be the age of the tree, it could be the water level at the time, the water table, but sometimes they don't survive. But this creates a food source and habitat for a range of other things. So I don't know a huge amount about the fungi that live on this sort of thing. I'd love to know more about it. There's not a lot of research around the relationship between beavers and these types of fungi, so it'd be interesting to know more about that. But they create these habitats through that activity. If you click again, please, Rob. So again, I was just mentioning Deadwood. So this is a picture from Hamfair Nature Reserve, where the beavers have been for some 20 years now. You can just see the top of the lodge there in the middle of the picture. So they have been felling trees and doing other such things, but by raising the water levels, They've also created this standing deadwood habitat, which is just fantastic, really, for such a range of other species, especially things like invertebrates and all sorts of things. Now, this area, obviously, we do want woodland in places where we'd have woodland naturally, but this area is essentially a peat bog. So it's the Hamfair Nature Reserve itself makes up 25 point something percent of the whole of Kent's peatland habitat. And when all these trees were there and the beavers weren't there, the trees were essentially drinking all the water and drying out the area. So the peat habitat was failing, essentially. So the beavers have completely revitalized this area and created this wonderful wetland habitat. And there's a whole range of scarce and rare species there that use it now. If you click again, please, Rob. They're known for their dam building activity, so we don't have a lot in the way of dams yet in Kent. These are two of the locations that are only found. One of them was January just gone, and the other one was first reported July last year, and that was the first dam that we were aware of in the Stour catchment. They tend to only dam sort of smaller watercourses, and they tend to do it because they want the water to be a certain depth. They like to stay in water to try and instinctively avoid predation. Obviously, they don't have to worry about predation too much in this country, but it's still very much instinctive. But the dams, what the beaver dams have been found to do is essentially filter the water, so that the water upstream is much thicker with sediment, and when the sediment settles there, it's been found to be there's much higher levels of heavy metals, nutrients, things like that, and downstream it's much cleaner. So essentially the dams, and when we say dam as well, we don't mean dam like humans would build it. It's essentially a leaky dam, in the same way that if we do a river restoration project, you put woody material into the system to try and create natural processes. This is what they do. So they tend to allow water to come over and sort of filter the water through. If you press again, please, Rob. Beavers are also very prolific diggers. So the picture on the left there is a beaver canal. And you can see, just for reference, the stick is my stick. That's about 4 foot long. So it's about a good sort of 3 foot wide. It's very deep. It's also about 3 or 4 foot deep as well, where the beavers use it so regularly. I think it sort of flushes it out, I suppose. So that connects water from one place to another, which obviously has a range of benefits for all sorts of things. The beavers, as I say, like to stay in the water. But you can see the picture on the right there is what looks like, I don't know if it's been officially confirmed, but it looks like a watervole burrow. So they're creating these canals, again, creates further habitat for other species. If you click again, please, Rob. So some of the challenges we've been facing locally. The picture that you can see now is probably the largest tree that I've come across so far that the beavers have felled. It's probably about a metre wide at the widest point. Obviously, some trees have personal value to people, but this tree is a cricketbat willow. So the landowner the crop owner, did want these trees protected. That's for those of you who don't know, I wasn't aware at the time until we had these site visits and these discussions, but cricketbat willows, when they get to this sort of size, the wood that they use for the cricketbats, it's somewhere around £500 a tree they're worth. So when the beavers come along and they have to be felled in a special way so that the wood doesn't crack, which the beavers aren't very good at, they tend to just do whatever they do. So this is one of the challenges that we've got. There are things in place, funding options in place for landowners and crop owners to protect the trees, which I might be talking a bit more about later. So I mentioned that they're prolific burrowers, and the picture that's just come up, you can see that it looks like what they've done is tried to dig a canal and connect the main Stour up with the wetland area, which would be to the right of this picture. You've got Stour on the left and the sort of wet area on the right. Now, this is a public footpath, so obviously there's public safety to consider. It's also a track that's used by the landowner for vehicle access to get around. So obviously, this needs a level of management here. But one of the other things as well, nutrient neutrality has just been mentioned. So this area here, you've got the Stour on the left, as I say, and the land on the right falls within the Stodmarsh Triple SI. So naturally, England are very concerned about having the high nutrient water level. Should the beavers connect it up, could drain the wetland for a start when the tide's out. But also the high nutrient river water going into the Triple SI is a problem at the moment. So this has actually been repaired in a way that still allows the beavers to use it, but it's protected. I think they've essentially used paving slabs to stop it from being dug in anymore. So that's been managed, and we're going to be keeping an eye on it to see if that's suitable management for it. If you click it again, please, Rob. Burrowing, as I mentioned, they are prolific diggers and burrowers. So this is in the bank of the Stour, probably somewhere between Fordwich and Grove Ferry. You can see there's a lovely big burrow. Beavers are quite substantial animals. So these burrows are probably a foot in diameter when they're dug, and then the water can make them a bit bigger at the entrance, at least. And what you can see in the background there is the railway line. So again, this is the sort of thing that we might be needing to keep an eye on. Network Rail are aware of this. Me and one of my colleagues, Tom, had a meeting with their ecologists, and we took them out. We showed them beaver signs. So we've started that process of making sure that different stakeholders are aware of potential issues. If you click again, please, Rob. Yeah, so this is another tree that this particular landowner wanted this tree protected. They wanted a few trees protected in this area. After me and my colleague gave them some advice, this was a few years ago, before the legislation came in and before any available funding came in to help landowners. But after me and my colleague Tom gave the landowner some advice, the landowner used chicken wire to try and protect the tree. That wasn't our advice. Beavers are very powerful animals, and if they can hit it just right with their teeth, they can even bite through chicken wire. And the landowner let me put a camera on there. These are just some stills from the cameras, but you can see the picture on the left is where the chicken wire was nice and fresh and put in place, and the picture on the right, the chicken wire has been moved about and bent out of place, and the tree's been had been further impacted by the beavers there. If you click again, please, Rob. So what's going on around Kent? We've got the East Kent Beaver Advisory Group, shortened to ECBAG, which sounds a bit like a sneeze. But the East Kent Beaver Advisory Group is made up of these. It's a neutral group made up of multiple stakeholders. It's ever changing. There will be more stakeholders included in this as time goes on. Currently, it's it's the organisation, as you can see here on the slide. It's led by the Kent Wildlife Trust. And we all meet up every couple of months and talk through any issues that might have come up, any reports that have come up, and we try to come up with ways that we can help landowners, and that sometimes includes site visits. Sometimes includes site visits, sometimes includes, or as time goes on, so it might include physical management, but we'll see. It depends on how things go and money and everything else as well. And the email address you can see there is the contact. So if anyone's got any questions or concerns, or you've got beavers on your land and you're not sure what to do, or even just near your land and you're worried about them coming near your land, if you email the beavers at Wildlife Gateway email address, that will come through to the East Kent Beaver Advisory Group, and we can help you where we can. Next slide, please. Survey. So back in the winter, around sort of February, March time, through Natural England, the Beaver Trust and the Kent Wildlife Trust did some area-wide surveys. The results from those surveys are being analysed as we speak. I think the report's due in the coming months, so hopefully the actual survey report will be released to the public in the next month or two. This is a wonderfully detailed hand-drawn map that I decided to do for this presentation, just to give an idea of the current distribution. The distribution as of March is the blue area, so you can see they're all there. There's evidence of them between Wye and Ashford, some up near Birchington, but the main bulk of them are Canterbury East. So we suspect that they are the natural dispersal is being held up in Canterbury by the large mill structures. So Abbott's Mill and Dean's Mill, for example. They will get past there eventually, and they will naturally get through there, but unfortunately they'll have to go up on the road. So it'll be the more daring ones that will make it, I expect. They disperse around March. When they get to about the age of 2, they as I mentioned earlier, very territorial. So they become sexually mature at 2, and they disperse around March, April every year. So it would be interesting to see. As I said, the survey was done around February, March this year. The two red dots you can see are just two of the records that I know of that have been reported since March, and they've obviously fallen outside the main area. So they are still very much still spreading. Next slide, please. Research. So I've just started doing a PhD with Canterbury Christchurch University to look at what the beavers are doing in the area. The project is it's a collaboration or a partnership project with Canterbury Christchurch University, Wildwood, and Natural England currently. Some of the main things we're looking at is management, so small scale management and how that might affect other species and what's best with other species. Obviously, we shouldn't just sheep pile a bank with a load of metal to try and stop the beavers. You might have water voles and other species to think about. The Environment Agency might say no if that's something you want to do in its main river. So we're trying to look at what the best approach is for these small-scale management practices on these banks. So the picture you can see on the left there is the Grove Wall, which is a footpath that runs alongside, sort of adjacent to Stour Nature Reserve and the River Stour from Grove Ferry. And that's where the beavers have been essentially coming up the banks. They're not actually burrowing there, but because they're such hefty animals, it sort of eats into the embankment there, which again is public safety. And Natural England don't want the river water in Stour, in that particular section of Stour Nature Reserve, because it's very fragile ecosystem there. And the picture on the right is the reed beds, or it's just a snapshot from Google Earth, but you can see some of what we suspect are beaver trails through the reed beds, and we don't know what they're doing up there, what effects they are having, if they're having any effects. So this is all something that we're starting to look into. Next slide, please. So what others can do, volunteer is one of the first things. Stour Nature Reserve is always looking for volunteers. We'll be looking for people to report signs. There's some apps currently in the Mammal Society is putting together an app which will record beaver signs in a way that means that the reports are transferable with wider, bigger surveys. That should be coming out at some point this year as well, hopefully. I record those sorts of apps. They're very good. So that's a good thing to do. Attend training days and open days. The Kent Wildlife Trust have got study day, which again they're looking to train people up for the field signs of beavers and sort of create their own mini army of volunteers to go out and report everything they find. Wildwood are also putting together some training. So the two lots of training at the moment. Some of it will be aimed at volunteers and some of it will be aimed at ecologists, a bit more in depth, sort of aimed at a bit more sort of expertise, I suppose. And just get outside and report anything you find, because they do every year. They move and they spread, so we sort of need to try and get a picture of what's going on. We just need as much information as possible, really. And for anyone interested in doing anything, the Kent Mammal Group offer grants. It's worth checking out their websites. There's grants for individuals. If there's any students watching, you can apply for a grant. It's a couple £100, maybe go towards a couple of trail cameras. If there's any teachers watching, got grants for schools, so to try and get kids involved. Any information. If you want any more information, sorry, just contact me. But it's worth checking out their website. Next slide, please. And there we go. Apologies. This is meant to be a video of a beaver just polishing off some hogweed there. But anyway, the still's quite lovely. So thank you for listening. There's my email address there, but please do contact the East Kent Beaver Advisory Group as well. Please do have a look at the Kent Mammal Group website for any of the grants. And a completely selfless plug, there's an Instagram page there that I put all beaver footage and stuff up, which thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ben. That was fascinating. I remember we went for a walk a few months ago now, and just to sort of look for signs of beavers, and now sort of whenever I go for a walk on the riverside anywhere, I always kind of apply that knowledge and see if I can find any, but no luck yet, unfortunately. But yeah, so up next we've got Lauren Baker from the Kentish Stour Countryside Partnership, and just a talk on a special river. To Lauren.
Okay, evening everyone. So yes, I'm going to be covering your general look at the wildlife that we have on the Great Stour. So if we go to the next slide, please. So I work on the Our Stour project, which falls within Kentish Stour Countryside Partnership. So on the Our Stour project, I've been working on education programs. So I do an awful lot of work with local schools and educating them on what wildlife they can find in and around the Stour. So there's an awful lot of river dipping involved. We also do events, as was mentioned earlier. We have still got a few places on the one at Kingsmead Field and Westgate Gardens coming up. I also do lots of river cleans as well. And we do riverfly surveys. So there's an awful lot that we are covering in the Our Stour project. And then Kentish Stour Countryside Partnership covers the whole Stour catchment, like I do with the Our Stour. And they have a lot of volunteer programs happening on Wednesday in Ashford, Thursday in Canterbury, as well as other bits and pieces, including other schoolwork away from the river, and working with local landowners. Next one, please. So just to give you an overview of what we're referring to when we talk about the Stour catchment, Canterbury is actually falling almost halfway along the course of the River Stour. So over on the left-hand side, you have got Lenham at the source of the Great Stour, and towards the bottom of the screen, we have got the source of the East Stour, which is over at Postling, and it's in Ashford where both of these rivers will join. And they're going to have gone on quite a journey already before they reach Canterbury. And in Canterbury themselves, it'll be separating into different channels because you have got where humans have adapted it for mills and other purposes. And then it will go through beautiful countryside through Stodmarsh, out to Plucksgutter, where it is joined by the Little Stour and also the Sar Pen. So you can see from this map, the Sar Pen's actually gone from quite a distance to reach the River Stour at Plucksgutter. And it's after Plucksgutter, it's just referred to as the Stour. I'm not quite sure who decided to keep changing the names as it went through, but it's after the Plucksgutter. Officially, it's just called the Stour until it finally goes out to sea at Pegwell Bay. And it's worth mentioning up at the top on the North Kent coast, we've also got other streams that are going out to sea, and they're in the Canterbury district as well. So you've got the Gorrel Stream, Swalcliffe Brook, and several others along the top there. Next slide, please. So the River Stour is classified as a chalk river, and there's only 200 chalk rivers in the world. If you watch the recent David Attenborough programs, he was going on about chalk rivers an awful lot, which was absolutely fantastic. 85% of our chalk rivers are in England or in the UK. There's a few in France, and the main reason we have this high concentration in this area is that when you look back millions of years ago, when chalk was being formed, it was happening across a vast area. So from Europe across to Russia is a high proportion of chalk. However, it's only in the Anglo-Parisian basin, so in southern England and France, where the chalk is close enough to the surface to then create our rivers, which you know as chalk rivers and streams. And whilst it's not a direct comparison, when you are looking at key species such as the giant panda and how much campaigning they get to protect them, so having looked at Google this morning, current rating is, or current numbers is 1,864, which seems awfully precise. But that's how many giant pandas are in the world, and we have around 200 chalk rivers. It would be interesting to see if we had the same amount of publicity and protection for our chalk rivers as giant pandas get across the whole world, what sort of impact we could have there in protecting and supporting our chalk rivers. So our chalk rivers do have a few key characteristics, which you can easily see when you go to see the river in Canterbury. So you have crystal clear water, a consistent flow, and a clean gravel bed. And with these key characteristics, as well as the water passing through the chalk, it means it is very, very rich in minerals such as iron and magnesium, and it will also remain at a relatively constant temperature year round. And it's these beautiful tranquil habitats, which are areas where we can go for us as humans for lovely, calm and relaxing areas, but also it's quite inspiring for many others. So it's believed that Kenneth Grahame was inspired by a chalk river when he wrote Wind in the Willows, and local artists in Canterbury, so Turner, who painted the Stour from various locations, and there's other chalk rivers that have been painted as well. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to whiz through a few of the key species, but this is by no means covering everything, and I've been a little bit biased and chosen some of my favourite species here as well. So the top left, we've got something called a case caddis, and the 20p is there to give you a bit of a scale because it's one of the larger ones we've found. Case caddis are one of our river flies, and they will hatch out into an adult stage, into a fly as well. But this is their nymph stage when they're in the river, and they will create their own case out of whatever they can find around them. So it could be small bits of silt, it could be small stones. We have unfortunately noticed some that are using little bits of plastic now. So we found one with glitter on it. So it just gives you an idea of the impact on another level that we are having on our rivers. Below that, we have an olive, or is a type of upwing. Again, will hatch out into a fly, and we find thousands of these when we are doing our kick samples. And at the bottom is a water scorpion. So I haven't actually found one in Canterbury on the Stour yet, but they are in the catchment. Water scorpions are absolutely loved by the children when we do find them. But it's a cool fact is that the bit on their bottom isn't anything to do with a sting. It's actually how they are breathing. So kids also love that fact as well, and I'm sure many adults will as well. And then on the right-hand side, just go through a few fish. We have got the bullhead at the top, the European bullhead, or also known as a miller's thumb. And in a minute, I will show you a really good example of how well they are camouflaged to our gravel beds. Below that, we've got a brown trout, and if the hopefully, if the video works, there's a lovely video of brown trout on the little Stour next to one of their reds. So we do have particularly good numbers of brown trout on the little Stour. They need the clean gravel beds for their breeding grounds, which is why the little Stour is particularly good for them. And at the bottom here, we've got a photo of an elver. This is a young eel, and chalk rivers can support eels and elvers exceptionally well. So this was taken this summer in Westgate Gardens, and this will continue to develop in the River Stour to what we call the yellow eel, before it then takes the huge journey back to the Sargasso Sea to finish its breeding cycle and the last part of its life cycle. So it's incredible to think that something so small that we found in the Westgate Gardens in Canterbury has got such a long journey ahead of it. If we go to the next slide. So this is an example of how well camouflaged a bullhead fish can be to the gravel bottom. So I will give you a couple of seconds to see if you can spot the bullhead fish in this photo. And then Rob, when you're ready, if you want to hit the next one, it should reveal where the bullhead has been hiding. I will confess this was actually taken on the River Stour just because it was an easier location for me to get a clear photo. But when you are on the banks of the River Stour, you can do this as well. I've been doing it in the Westgate Gardens recently, spotting them. And then on the next slide, we'll see if this works. We've got a video of brown trout. So that just gives you an idea of the size of the brown trout that we are finding. That was on the Little Stour near Littlebourne, and also the importance of those clean gravel beds because they create these reds, which is where they need clean gravel for their eggs to be laid and then their eggs to develop into the young fish in clean habitat. So now just moving on to, again, very brief overview of some of the species you might see flying around. So we've talked about the river invertebrates when they're in their nymph stage, but we also see them when they are at their adult stage as the damselflies. So we have got the banded demoiselle at the top, and then we've also got the willow emerald damselfly at the bottom here. So the willow emerald is actually a really interesting one because it started making a comeback in England over the last few years. Before, I think it was like 2000-ish, it was only found in 2 sites, but the Stour catchment has actually become a stronghold for them now. And the British Dragonfly Society are doing several surveys of them as well, which you can look at. I think it's called Willow Emerald Watch. And banded demoiselles at the top there, that's a male. And they are particularly well known for the chalk rivers. You see them in big groups flying around as well. In the middle, we have got a mayfly. This is the green drakes. It's one of the largest mayflies that you're going to see. And they have 2 stages to their life cycle. So that's, I won't go into that now, but it's a fascinating part of some of our river invertebrates. And obviously, when they are flying around, they become food for many other creatures, including our grey wagtail, which is at the top. So not only in the river, we are looking at all of the river invertebrates that are sorry, the chat screen keeps popping up and blocking my screen. There we go. Not only in the river are the river invertebrates food for fish, but when they hatch out, they are food for grey wagtails, house sparrows, blue tits, long-tailed tits. And then we get to the iconic kingfisher. So kingfishers are often seen whizzing around. Flash of blue is often what many people see, but then we have things like little egrets, grey herons, which are also eating the fish as well. Next slide, please. And my personal favourites are the cute and fluffy things. So just looking at mammals, I know we've already had a fantastic talk by Ben on the beavers, but we have also got bat species around that are particularly, they particularly like hunting around rivers. So we have Dorbenton bats, and they're also known as riverbacks because they are very well skilled at picking the creatures off the surface of the water just as they're emerging, such as our midges, mosquitoes. So as much as it's annoying for us to see so many mosquitoes, they are very, very beneficial in supporting a huge range of bats as well. And you will also see pipistrelles flying around catching the bats as well. We have water voles. So whilst you're not likely to get water voles on the main channel where it gets wider and deeper, because they do prefer your smaller channels, they are in Canterbury. There was a fantastic photo sent through of one to Kentish Stour last year, very close to Kingsmead Field, which was fantastic to see them so close to the heart of the city. And they are quite elusive, so hopefully there are some around as well. I'm fully aware there is lots of rats around, but the water voles are around as well. And also elusive, we have got our otters. Bit more potluck. I've yet to see a wild otter, so I think you do have to be just right place, right time. They have huge territories, but they are around, so keep your eyes peeled, maybe for field signs. That's something that you might find more so than the otter themselves. Next slide, please. And we do also have the white-clawed crayfish. They aren't in the Canterbury district that we're aware of. Any crayfish in this area are more likely to be your American signal crayfish, so an invasive species. However, Kentish Stour are doing an awful lot of survey work. It's actually happening right now, where we're going out and looking at key sites where we know white-clawed crayfish are. So this is mainly in the upper course of the Stour. And then we are looking at potential sites where we can reintroduce them, where they will be away from the American signal crayfish, and we can start to reintroduce them back into areas where they were. Next slide, please. And it's not just looking at the animals, we do have fantastic flora around as well. So this is some water crowfoot, which you can often see when it is in flowers as big blankets across the surface. And this will attract pollinators, which are daring enough to go near the water surface and not touch the water. So I've seen honeybees, I've seen bumblebees feeding off the water crowfoot flowers as well. And all of the plants will provide a habitat underneath the surface as well for invertebrates to be hiding in, fish to hide in. And that can be seen if we just go to the next slide. We've got yellow flag iris on the left-hand side, which is a fantastic plant for our invertebrates that are hatching out to rest on once they've first emerged. So damselflies can often be found with their exuvia once they've emerged, and dragonflies, but also mayflies will be found resting here. And then we've also got, on the right-hand side, we have got the huge leaves, the underwater leaves of water lilies, and again, create a huge area where fish can be sheltered and smaller river invertebrates as well. Next slide, please. So I think if you click it again, it should come up with my long, oh, it's going one by one. So we have got various threats, unfortunately, to our chalk rivers. Some have already been mentioned, and I don't really want to make this into sort of doom and gloom talk, because there is lots that we could all do to protect our Stour, even if it's as simple as only flushing the right things down the toilet. As stupid as that sounds, it makes a huge impact. So only flushing the 3 Ps. But climate change, where we are having less rain, we've got more stress on our aquifers, that's having a huge impact. Pollution is such a huge topic. I could be here for easily the whole presentation talking about pollution, but you've got things like surface runoff from our cars, you've got chemicals that are washing out of building sites, or car washes. Not all of them are correctly disposing of the water from car washes. We have got the agricultural runoff. There's a huge range from that, as well as the wastewater treatment works. Pressure on aquifers, so more housing developments, we have had that issue where it's been paused in the Stour catchment because of housing developments and other issues going on, nutrient neutrality. But the pressure on aquifers will continue with climate change, and the more houses we build, we need to make sure that we are using only the water we require. Everyone needs to do that. It's not just one or two, everyone needs to be doing that. We've mentioned invasive species such as the American signal crayfish, but we've got American mink that are impacting our water bowls. There's a range of plants, so Japanese knotweed, Himalayan balsam. There's some that are actually in the water themselves that blanket the surface so no light can get to the bottom of the rivers. We have weirs and man-made banks, which prevent barriers for fish passage, and also man-made banks where it's solid wood. Water voles can't burrow into these, so that's another issue. And just in general protection for certain species, it takes a long time to come through. Funding for projects, there's only so much money to go around, and unfortunately, projects often only last for a few years. So I've been very lucky that our Stour started over 5 years ago, and I'm still going. Originally, it was meant to be 3 years, but we've managed to find additional funding. But it's constantly finding the funding to continue to support what we're doing. It's an endless job, so that's another thing that we are always having to balance. So that finishes off my whistle stop presentation. Hopefully, yes. So I will come to questions at the end.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lauren. It really reminds us of how sort of diverse, the river is, and yeah, it's a really good insight. So thank you for that. And next up, we have Jake Weeks, who's going to give us a presentation on the brief history of Canterbury, its springs, and the Great Stour. Before we go into that, though, I'd just like to remind you that we have the QR code here for the Q&A session, which will take place after Jake's talk. And yeah, that's where we'll be looking for your questions for later on. But yeah, so over to Jake.
Hello, everyone. Straight onto my first slide. And Lauren's already used the word whistle stop, but I'm going to, or phrase, I'm going to use that as well. Let's go on a trip through 500,000 years of the history of the relationship between the place we now call Canterbury and the Stour. And the first thing I've done, the first slide I've done is the bedrock geology, because it's just to show that Canterbury is on a kind of a little spur of the chalk aquifer, okay? So it's a brilliant place to have a settlement. And we've had a settlement here, which on and off was a town from around about 100 to 50 BC. Okay, so 2,000 years, 20 centuries of settlement on this side, the southeast side of the Stour especially. Now the red arrows there are marking locations of springs as well, which are formed by the chalk aquifer. And actually, contrary to all my images and all maps, Canterbury, I don't know if you've noticed, is not flat. It actually has lots and lots of dips in it, and you'll find that those dips do actually tie in with these spring lines. And I'm going to keep the spring lines on my slides as we go through. Next slide, please. Actually, back one slide, I forgot to say something. Thank you. So you can see two different levels of chalk in the green here, and then as a later deposit of Thanet Formation. And these are the bedrock. This is the bedrock in the Canterbury area. So next slide, please. Thank you. So we move on to what we call the superficial geology, which overlies the bedrock and is actually a result of the Ice Age. And we're coming here to about 500,000 BP before the present to 10,000. And I hope you can see I've marked on here little T's and A's all over the plan. And the reason for that is that the T's are the earliest deposits, and they're called river terrace deposits. And the reason why they're there is because they, in a high energy thawing of different ice ages. It would go to cold and warm stages, and at the end of the cold stage, you'd have high energy river action, and the gravels were deposited by those fast flowing rivers, massive rivers, in fact. And so you can see, hopefully from the map, just how high up the valley sides those gravels go. So the gravels at the top of the valley sides are actually the earliest, and the river has migrated around, depositing its gravels. And just by the two arrows just next to Canterbury West, if you go up to Canterbury West, it'll be fine. Can you see Canterbury West? No, no. Yes, he doesn't know Canterbury very well. He admitted it. Well, just by Canterbury West, there was a site called which was the former Hallett's Garage, and in amongst the gravels we found an elephant tusk, because obviously a long time ago, the things that were being washed down the rivers in these gravels were a wholly different set of flora and fauna, which we find in those things. Now, where it says, you can see the yellow line, or the yellow linear area going through, which has got an A on it, and that stands for alluvium. And that's where the Stour, the Great Stour, has settled down into this kind of river channel, which has had various different streams across it down the years. Okay, and that's where we're getting into the Holocene period, out of the Pleistocene Ice Age, more into the Holocene deposits of silt and sand and alluvia, as we call them. And this would have been a very important site for the hunter-gatherers of the Mesolithic, which comes after the Paleolithic, the Middle Stone Age. There were people here using this resource since those early times. And up until about 6,000 years before the present, they would have been hunting and gathering. But after that, we've moved into the Neolithic, which is more based on farming. Next slide, please. And coming right up to date, well, not really right up to date, but very much closer to date, here's a little plan which shows the various different types of finds that have been made which pertain to the earliest settlement that we've got at Canterbury, that's anything like a large settlement, and that's in the late Iron Age. And these are the people that took on Caesar and lost in 54 BC. Okay, but all the different symbols there relate to different things. So the triangles relate to ditches, a ditch system that's been found all the way across the river valley. And then you've got a cluster of houses and parts of houses, round houses and so on, which are the yellow dots. And you can see that's mixed in with a load of ditches and a load of other things like pits and things like that. That's right. That, you'll note, is right where there is an important spring line, yeah, where those blue arrows are. And there's wells there that are tapping the aquifer that belong to that period as well. And there are 3 large ditches which represent the Iron Age first settlement, the main one on that side of the river. But this is based on LiDAR imagery, and it's been coloured in, so you can see the river channel, which was that yellow bit before. And what you've got is usually reconstructed as braided streams crossing that river channel, braided chalk streams. But one thing I think is really interesting to notice all the way through the history that we're going through is how little has been going on in that river channel that's left a trace. In fact, settlement is mostly on this southeast side, as you'll see. And when we come up to the more recent maps, you'll see that these open spaces have been open spaces until very recently as well. So as much as we tend to think of Canterbury as covering the whole of this map, the Iron Age version of it, as you can see, is clustered on that side with a few bits on the other side, also near springs. That little blue dashed line, by the way, is the reconstructed prehistoric trackway that goes along the side of the river channel. Okay, next slide, please. So one thing I'm actually going to suggest, I think, something quite novel in this talk. You heard it here first, right? It's not about my drawing skills in PowerPoint, which are obviously lamentable, but you'll just bear with me, hopefully. The blue areas are kind of, the big blobby blue areas are kind of picking up that river channel type thing. And you'll notice that I've drawn a squiggly line which represents what we now call the intramural Stour, i.e. the Stour that goes within the walls or the lines of the walls of Canterbury. And I think that it's worth investigating whether this was the actual main channel of the Stour, and that the other one over by in Westgate Gardens was something that was actually resulted from late Roman remodeling of the topography of the town. Okay, and obviously had a big impact on the topography of the town ever since. But this is the early Roman period, and one thing to notice is that the connection between the spring line, you see those red ditches, can you see where they're marked red, the ditches there? That's the Iron Age settlement. And then you've got a theatre and baths that represent the earliest version of Canterbury. And this might have been people from Gaul even, because it's very like a Gallo-Roman resort next to the first road that goes past. But it's not just a resort where you're putting on your trunks or whatever and going swimming. They did have a little swimming pool at the baths as well, but it's also a religious resort. And note, it's the connection, the water connection, which is absolutely paramount in Iron Age and Roman religion. There's a very big connection. And it's the connection between the spring, which goes down right through the center of the theatre, and the River Stour. So it's this very interesting focus on water management. Also, by the way, there's another spring just to the southwest where it says Fortlet, and there's a blob there, and that's where there may have been a Roman fort there, and it's actually roughly in the same position as the later Norman castle, and there are Anglo-Saxon wells there as well. So I'm just trying to point out the connection between the water management, not just of the Stour, but of these springs and their connection with the Stour. Next slide, please. So we move on to AD 110, and this is where Canterbury, from 110 to 270, this is where Canterbury really enters its floruit as a Roman or a Romano-British town. It gets some extra roads. You may notice, if actually, Rob, if you just quickly go back to the previous slide, and then to this one, you may notice that, yeah, move on to the next slide, please. What's happened there is it's all been realigned on that first road. You also might notice that all the townhouses, those little U-shaped objects there, they all cluster right round where the spring is as well. It gets a new theatre. The temple precinct is based on the spring with the river going along the bottom there. There's also pottery and kiln industry up to the northwest. Again, I think that's interesting that it's related to the water on the side of the hill, and there's probably a very large clay quarry there, actually, as well. And the springs to the west, to the east rather, right, go right over to the east. This is the beginning of what becomes the cathedral precinct, but it was initially a little housing development in the late 2nd to 3rd century of Romano-British Canterbury. So it starts to form the shape of Canterbury and the ring road, even at this stage. Next slide, please. In 270 to 290, someone, perhaps a renegade general called Carausius, who tried to set up his own mini empire in Britain, built or had built the walls of Canterbury. So the Roman walls are on the same line as the medieval and later walls that now stand. But look what happens as well. They move across, they go right across that floodplain to the northwest and round. And funnily enough, the river goes along there as well. So I think there's an interesting question there about that being, in fact, part of this topographical change that happened in the late 3rd to 4th century. There's lots of open spaces within the walls, and where those roads end down to the south and southwest within the walls, we haven't really found much beyond those. It's a bit like they did some extra space to include these what were probably water meadows as well within that large blue blob area. So let's move on. I said it was a whistle-stop tour. A quick view of the early Anglo-Saxon, which has now got its 2 rivers, okay, and the floodplain. But you'll notice that there's 2 kind of centres. One is roughly around where the theatre is, but more to the point, it's right next to the springs. And there are Anglo-Saxon wells there as well, amongst what they call these sunken feature buildings. And then there's the ecclesiastical centre, which would become the cathedral and St Augustine's Abbey up to the north. Okay. But yes, so moving on, thank you for that. In the Middle Saxon period, you can see that there's still, and from 700 to 850, this is really where the town of Cantwara Burh, which is what the Anglo-Saxon name of the town is, which means the fortified place of the Kent people. Burh is fortified place, Cantwara is Kent people. This is really the first convincing version of this, and you'll see that it's kind of a settlement shift, and it's based on those springs as well. But what we also start getting are some really interesting charters, which are written, they're ways of giving people land. It's called book land, actually, because it gives you a solid piece of paper. You can say, this has been given to me by so and so, and it's sort of the beginning of all sorts of things about wider state and polities and that sort of thing as well. And we do get some charters about this land between the rivers, in fact, and it's got a name by this point. The King of Mercia in the Midlands, who was the overlord, gave the land, a large bit of the land between the rivers, which was called Binan Ia. And this, don't forget, this is now called Binnerwith. Okay, so these are quite fundamental things. How it links with Bingley's Island, which is just down to just where the rivers meet at the southern end. Yeah, Bingley Island. That's a whole other story, which we'll come back to. But there's also lots of charters that relate to what are called the Burwara Maida, which is the meadows of the Burwara. In other words, the water meadows of the people of the Bur, which is Canterbury, and that's all down there as well, between the rivers. In other words, you've got a protected place for pasture and water meadows. Next slide, please. Next slide, thank you. You can see that still most of Canterbury, is still up on and this is where we're getting a development of the roads that are still in place in the late Anglo-Saxon period. And this is really the full development of Canterbury proper, of Cantwara Burh. You can see that the black triangles are churches and ecclesiastical centres, and we're getting the road that goes across, which is now the High Street, and roads that connect to the High Street. But that means you've got to have a build-up in order to have a church in that floodplain. Moving on, next slide, please. This this is not a good representation of the work of William Urry, because his maps are much more complicated than this. William Urry in the 50s to 60s of the last century looked at all the Christchurch rentals and managed to reconstruct where people lived in 12th century Canterbury and put that onto the Ordnance Survey, the first edition Ordnance Survey map. So we can, and he used to walk down the road and tell the people who were helping him do this work where, for example, Terrick the goldsmith lived and things like that. Okay, so it's an incredible work. But the thing I wanted to show on this slide is the way that Westgate Ward, which is at the top between the rivers, you go to the top, that's actually west. Yeah, Westgate Ward, and there's Westgate. That doesn't have it. That's based on these administrative areas, which are the medieval administrative areas, and it doesn't have any land outside the wall, unlike the other wards. But it does, just if you follow the word Westgate down, it does just jut in to cross over the river, and the river is the river there is the edge of town in effect. All right, that's where the edge of the medieval town is still. The reason that the Westgate Ward goes into there, by the way, is probably to do with the fact that then you take in the King's Mill and the Royal Exchange and all the important places in relation to royal power in Canterbury. That's competing with Christchurch and St Augustine's for local turf, shall we say. Okay, next slide, please. So we're jumping forward now, but this is based on a medieval original, this map. It's Brown and Hogenberg's map of Canterbury, dated 1588. And I was just going to point, the reason why we know it's based on well, there's all sorts of reasons why we know it's based on a medieval original. But for one thing, you'll note that the friaries, so the Grey Friars, the Black Friars, and the White Friars, which are 13th to early 14th century, are placed as they would be on the edge of town, and the Grey Friars and the Black Friars are indeed in that area between the rivers. So it's open territory, and so was where the White Friars was put as well. You also note there's lots of mills on the rivers, and the medieval mills were all owned by the magnates of the town. So you have the Abbot's Mill, and you have the King's Mill, and also further downstream you have Sheepershot Mill, but I'm not quite sure who owns that. But that's another thing entirely. And the guys down the bottom of there are just all having a discussion about how incredible Canterbury is. Next slide, please. We're approaching the final slides. This is an incredible map. No one knows who did it. It's dated, as you can see, to the early 17th century. And it's almost as if someone went up in a balloon and managed to draw Canterbury. I want to draw your attention to the fact that there's very little. North is to the right. Okay. So Westgate is at the top where the main high street goes. So you can see the intramural Stour, and if you take the cursor over to the over to the south side or the left side of the map, you can see the Stour coming in and then going through. But notice that it's not north-south, that west-east section of the Stour is not joined by another small tributary, as it would be if Bingley Island existed at this point. It's coming in as part of that's where the rivers divide to go either side of that whole area, which, as you can see, is very largely devoid of anything except the Grey Friars and the Black Friars. Okay, most of the town is on is on the bottom of the picture. Next slide, please. This is a map by the Doges of 1752, and it's the first properly triangulated map. Again, notice that the floodplain is still largely devoid of urbanness, and but you can see the beginnings of Black Griffin Lane, etc., as well, coming into that. And last slide, well, the penultimate slide is Collard's map of 1843, and then, and only then, can you see the development of the houses at St. Peter's Lane and Black Griffin Lane, and so on. So the 2 points to take away from this, I would say, well, that's one big point I want to make. This map is available, and it's supporting us doing the Canterbury Historic Towns Atlas as well. But this map, which has a gazetteer of all the sites of Canterbury and a combination of different layers showing you the development of Canterbury through time, and some of the things I've mentioned, including Sheepershot Mill, is available from all local bookshops, especially Waterstones and so forth, or online. And I'll put the link to this information in the comments in the chat in a second. But also just that this connection between the river and Canterbury, I think it is an important connection through the spring lines of Canterbury as well. And that's where I'll leave it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jake. So now I just want to introduce Canterbury's Wild Stour leaflet. So this was created by Canterbury Bid and Partners, and it's the perfect place to go to if you want to hear more about the Great Stour after today's various talks. So there's loads of information about wildlife in there, so how to get involved as part of the community and what the community are currently doing, and then also ways to explore open space and various open spaces that we have. So where can you find this? So at various events this week, they will be given out as well. So if you're booked in or you're planning to book on one, then you should be able to hopefully find them there. This includes the river cleanups, the litter picks as well, and the bulb planting. They'll also be available at the Bleaney House, Art and Knowledge, and then potentially at the kiosk as well by the coach park. Yeah, so it's really interesting. I've got one here. It's quite big, so I'm not going to open it up, but it's definitely worth checking out and getting your hands on one. So now we're going to go to Dan for the Q&A. So he's going to direct your questions to the relevant person who can best answer them. So yeah, Dan.
Hi, thanks everybody. Okay, I'm going to try and so we're starting off with questions for Ben. And so the first question for Ben is, this is about willows on the riverbank. Don't willows on the riverbank stabilise the ground and fight against flooding? Stour Valley is a flood zone. It floods at Barton Mill, and then there are bite marks on willow. So I suppose the question is, yeah, do you know much about the effect of willows on the riverbank and the impact of beavers on the willows?
Yeah, I can try. So willows are a favourite food of the beavers, and yeah, the roots of willows will stabilise the bank. They'll also help to protect the bank from things like beavers and other animals going up and over and burrowing as well. As I mentioned in my talk, for the most part, the trees. Sorry if my dog barks or whines. My neighbours are making noises, which is very unnerving, obviously. The trees are coppice, so if they do fell a tree, even if it's quite a big tree, especially with willows, they're really quite prolific. As long as they stay moist or wet, then they'll continue to grow, usually, more often than not. And you'll also get to when the big trees have got their roots going out, and when they're felled, the root systems take that into account, so they can sort of become thicker as well and sort of grow more roots to enable the new growth to come up and things like that as well. So the beaver activity won't, in theory, the beaver activity won't sort of hinder this bank stabilization nature of the roots of the trees. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, right, brilliant, thank you. Then the next one is about, I suppose it's, do beavers eating fish mean that they compete with fish stocks for other wildlife, such as seals and things like this?
No, not at all. Beavers are completely herbivorous. They don't eat fish at all. That is quite a common misconception. Obviously, otters will eat fish where they can, but no, beavers feed solely on plant species. And it's their activity on trees is usually more in the winter when there's less other vegetation around. In the springs and in summer, it's more, they'll sort of eat pretty much anything really. So yeah, no competition with fish there.
Fantastic. And the final question for you then is this question about, I think this is where, are there beaver dams on the Stour? I suppose the locations are the locations public or?
Not on the main Stour at the moment. The Eurasian beavers aren't quite as prolific as their American cousins in terms of dam building. So you see these amazing structures over in America and Canada, some of the dams. It's likely that once they get upstream of urban Ashford in the upper tributaries of the Stour, you got the Great Stour and the East Stour and some other waterways like the White Mill Dyke. They'll probably start building dams on those smaller systems there, which, so long as the farmers and landowners are on board and hopefully involved in some sort of scheme that helps them should any of their land flood, there shouldn't be any problems there. If anything, it helps with, or it can help with flooding downstream because it holds water up and releases it much slower. So, but we'll see how that goes.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Ben. I've just got two for Lauren now, if that's okay. These were more about your threats to the River Stour, Lauren. We've got a question here about if we've currently got any chemical and biological contaminant screening being done on the River Stour. Just because you mentioned,
I wouldn't know. It wouldn't be Kentish Stour doing that. So we do riverfly surveys. I might throw it back to Ben with his Environment Agency hat on to know if the Environment Agency do something like that, but I'm not aware. The Environment Agency would be where I'd go for that, but it's nothing that Kentish Stour do. We don't have the funding for that.
Okay, so we've got other questions relating to river pollution essentially. So the answer to that would be to refer to Kentish Stour or the Environment Agency. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean pollution does exist. So. But if I did hold talk on that, I'd be here for half an hour because there's so many different types of it. And I was trying to keep it a happy talk, if I'm honest. Environment Agency have got a database explorer, which gives you information. But as to how much details on there, I'm not too sure.
Sorry, just to jump in, I've just put a link in the chat to the Catchment Explorer that I think Lauren's referring to.
Yeah.
It doesn't, to my knowledge, it doesn't have details of sort of sampling points, but it does sort of give an indication of what is sampled for the WFD regulations, essentially, of the water of the catchment.
Okay, fantastic, Lauren. So the final question, so I've just got to flip back to the is for Jake. So Jake, we have a question on: have there been any archaeological finds that link Canterbury to Europe and beyond from the pre-Roman and Roman eras?
Yes, many. In fact, there have been migrations into Britain, and Canterbury is right in the way of those migrations ever since 500,000 BP. But we're starting to find out more now from the genomic studies about just how what an impact migrations have had to our populations. Because we can see about the way the genetics have changed at various stages to fit with the archaeology. So yes, with all of the material from the prehistoric period onwards has connections with Europe, and it was connected to Europe, and the peninsula of Kent was a way into Britain from Europe, an important way in, obviously, right from that time. It's such a huge subject that yes, it's been connected.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jake. So we've come to 8 o'clock now, Rob. I think those are really the kind of questions that related directly to the speakers. So
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, thank you, Dan,
okay.
for that. And yeah, so finally, I just wanted to say a big thank you to firstly our guest speakers today, so Charlotte, Ben, Lauren, and Jake. Yeah, thanks for coming along and taking time out of your evening to sort of inform us all on all of that interesting stuff. Yeah, secondly, all the community groups and partners that have in some way, you know, put together an event for us, been part of the event program. There's some really exciting things happening. So yeah, just a big thank you for getting involved and being part of this year's, or the first Riverfest. A special thank you as well to Sean Petman and our husband for the photos seen throughout this presentation that weren't otherwise credited. There are some really nice ones there that have sort of backdropped a lot of the slides. And then finally, to everyone who showed up today, yeah, it's really appreciate it. Of course, wouldn't happen without your involvement as well. And then again, to anyone else who has signed up to events this week. Yeah, and hopefully we will see you there, because